Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be telling you the players that you should stop ignoring because they're incredibly lowly owned and I think they could be excellent picks for Game Week 1. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, in today's video, we're going to take a look at the best defenders, midfielders, and forwards currently ranked under 10% at the time of me recording. And I know this is pretty contradictory because I often say ownership doesn't matter. Stop fixating on ownership. Don't have differentials just for the sake of it. So I'm not saying own these players because they are less than 10% owned. I'm just saying I think all of the players that I'll discuss today are pretty good picks, some of them excellent picks, and at the time of me recording, not many people have them. And I guess it is a good thing if you can pick players that not many others are identifying. And also it keeps the content fresh, right? We talk about the same players often over and over again. So hopefully there'll be some new players that you haven't heard discussed much at all. And if I do miss anyone today, let me know down below because there are so many players that are lowly owned at the moment. And there could be some really hidden gems. Most importantly, before we take a look at the first set of players here, which is the defenders, the first episode of FPL Therapy, my new podcast, is now live as of yesterday. The first guest that I had on the podcast was FPL Focal, who I know a lot of you love and watch over on YouTube. He's absolutely fantastic and he was a brilliant first guest. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, and of course all the socials as well. There will be links down below in the description. Please do go check it out and show it some love. Give it a listen, give it a watch. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment, all the usual stuff. If you're listening on podcast, I didn't realize how important it was to get 5-star ratings. So if you do enjoy it, obviously listen to a bit first. Please do consider rating 5-star on Apple or Spotify. I would really appreciate it. And just in case you haven't checked it out yet, here is a very short clip from the podcast so you have a bit of an idea about what FPL Therapy is like.
How would you rank the premiums then, the midfielders?
That's a good question.
I've put mine in order here. Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first while I think about it. I like that. Yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
So the order I've gone in is Salah, Saka, Palmer, Son, KDB, Foden. Now, it feels wrong putting Foden at the bottom, but it's just based on what Pep's been saying about he's not going to be involved in pre-season. I think he said he's not going to play in the Community Shield.
This is for Game Week 1 you're ranking, right? Not just overall as assets. For Game Week 1 to own
For
them.
the season, like I'd have KDB further down.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd have Palmer higher up, for example.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, I'm talking about Game Week 1 here. So I'd go Salah, Saka, Palmer, Son, KDB, and then Foden.
I'm gonna go for the cop out here and say I fully agree with that list. Genuinely,
Yeah.
The only one I would be if we get confirmation that Son is through the 9 and on pens, and they don't sign Solanke or Tony.
Yeah.
I think I might put Son ahead of Palmer if you have Nkunku in there just as an option. But yeah, I would agree that I think for me, Salah and Saka are slightly clear of the other options at the moment. So guys, there you are. That's a clip from FPL Therapy. Please do check it out. It's exciting to finally be on Apple and Spotify as well. If you want to listen to me ramble on about FPL, but you don't have to open the YouTube app, then this is obviously a nice way to do that. You can listen to me on the commute or in the morning or whatever best suits you. So with today's video, like I said, it's going to be defenders, midfielders, forwards. Starting with the defense, the tables are the same for each. So just to briefly explain, I've got obviously their name, price, ownership percentage, all less than 10%. The amount of starts that they had last season, their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. So this is goal threat and assist threat combined. Their projected points according to Fantasy Football Hub. And you can get 50% off now at Fantasy Football Hub using the link in the description. And also fixture difficulty as well from Game Week 1 to 8. So the first defender is a defender that I've been raving about since last season, really, and that is Anthony Robinson. He managed 6 assists last season in the Premier League. He's already got a couple of attacking returns in pre-season. The only issue I would say with Fulham is we don't know how much Paulinho leaving is going to affect them, plus toss-in. They've lost players that they've not necessarily directly replaced, but I do think they're a well-coached team, and I do think they have a lot of quality in that side as well. Obviously, they've signed Smith Rowe, they've got Andreas, and we'll talk about both of those later, and Moniz we'll talk about later as well. Going forward, it's really exciting, and that's why I think Robinson could be really nice, because I think he'll get attacking returns, but you do need the clean sheets to go alongside that. It's not good enough to just have the attacking threat unless you are getting a crazy number of attacking returns. So we need to see how much the losses that they've got to their starting 11 affect them defensively. But the fixtures are actually really nice for Fulham. He's got decent goal threat. And I just think in game weeks 2 and 3 against Leicester and Ipswich, I could imagine that he could get an attacking return or two. And so I've actually had him in a lot of my drafts, and he rotates quite nicely with the Newcastle defence as well. So I'll discuss Hall in a second, but Hall, Livramento, whoever you think will start if you want to pay a little bit more for Fabian Schär. So Robinson for me is right up there. He's been in a lot of my drafts, as long as I think you can rotate him in certain weeks. So do look at those defender rotations. It's almost more important than outright fixtures is which weeks can you play some defenders and play the other ones. You probably don't want to play a 4.5 defender for a middling defence, particularly, I think, every single week. So you want to try and rotate them if you can. Another good 4.5 defender is actually Dunk. Now, he's not got a star next to his name because I don't think he's one of the very best differentials in the defender spot, purely just because I don't really like the fixtures for Brighton. But again, if you can rotate him in the correct weeks, you can see he's actually got 0.17 XGI per 90, which is really strong, especially considering he played quite a lot of minutes. You can see actually Ben Mee also has 0.17 XGI per 90. So both me and Dunk are just two players that I think they're very, very, very good from corners and set pieces, and you would expect them to get a couple of goals per season as a minimum. So I really like Dunk and me for the attacking threat. They're both playing for good defences. Actually, Brentford were much better than Brighton defensively last season. Brentford were a very solid defence, but I'm not necessarily fully confident that that continues this season. They've obviously still got players returning from injury, so we'll see. But I think me and Dunk for attacking threat and safety of minutes, they both feel like pretty good options. I've got to talk about Munoz at the differential. I mean, he's 4.1%. He's an absolutely ridiculously good option. I had him in a lot of my early drafts. My last few, I've taken him out. But in my most recent one, which will actually be live tomorrow, Munoz is back in there. And the reason for that is he's 5 mil. I know his attacking threat sat there looks, well, it's worse than Dunk and me. So he's not got that much attacking threat. But he only had 16 starts last season. He had the attacking returns to go with it. And if you look at how he's played for Colombia, he's been ridiculous. He's been getting goals and assists. And he's essentially going to be playing as a right winger, I think, for Crystal Palace this season, because often the wingers invert slightly. I think Munoz is well and truly worth the £5 million price tag. And I'm trying to get him back into my team because often we start with a draft that we really like and then we just start changing things for the sake of it. And I look at Munoz and I think you'd struggle to get a better £5 million defender, in my opinion. So he's up there for me, and I like the idea of covering the Crystal Palace defence. I know there are rumours or strong rumours that Gay might leave, but you have to remember that under Glasner, Gay didn't really play that many minutes towards the back end of last season. So I don't think that Gay leaving suddenly makes the Crystal Palace defence really weak. Of course, they'd be stronger with him there, but I still feel like there'll be a good defence to cover. So I think Munoz is probably my favourite defender at that ownership of only 4.1%, which feels ridiculous to say. I've got Leif Davis of Ipswich in here just for the attacking threat. I mean, it obviously was in the Championship last season, but he managed 0.31 XGI per 90, which is similar to the likes of Trent and Robertson. Obviously, it's in the Championship, and he might not carry that through. But we saw with Alfie Doughty last season for Luton, he's still got some attacking returns in the Prem. And I would argue, based on what we've seen, Leif Davis is a better, more attacking fullback than Doughty. So I think he could be a really nice option. And actually, from Game Week 3, Ipswich's fixtures are really strong. So Leif Davis has to be in there. If you want to know who Davis rotates really nicely with, it's the Crystal Palace defence. So actually, without spoiling too much of my video tomorrow, a nice rotation might be Munoz and Davis. You've got two really attacking fullbacks/wingbacks that will get you lots of attacking returns, hopefully clean sheets as well chucked in. The fixtures rotate fairly nicely. And to be honest, most weeks you'd want to play Munoz anyway, so maybe Davis is just sat there on the bench. So I really like those two, even as a rotation. Pau Torres. Everyone's talking about Konsa. Pau Torres was more nailed than Konsa, arguably, before. I'd say they were maybe as nailed as each other, but Pau Torres was starting every single game and getting 90 minutes before his injury. And I know they've got the likes of Mings returning, Diego Carlos. They've got quite a few players that can play at centre-back, but I still think Pau Torres is going to be first choice. His attacking threat isn't that high, but neither is Konsa. So I do wonder why Pau Torres is going so under the radar in comparison to Konsa. But I think he could be a really good option as long as he is fully fit and ready for the start of the season. You've got Ben Mee, I've just spoken about. Really good option, attacking threat, very similar to Lewis Dunk. I would be tempted there. The player that, and this was coming from the FPL Therapy podcast, FPL Focal has convinced me that Lewis Hall's going to start the season at left back. Now, if he doesn't, obviously don't blame Oscar, but it does look very likely based on pre-season that Hall will be starting the season at left back. But it's almost not even left back. It's more of an attacking role than that. It's not just a plain back four. So Lewis Hall in an advanced position with his technical ability on the ball, if he is semi-nailed and plays most minutes for Newcastle, he's an absolute steal at 4.5. So I've put a star next to him because if he gets the minutes, I think he's right up there as one of the best 4.5s. And it's a very aggressive tactic to start the season with someone like Lewis Hall, but I really do like it. And then I'll just finish with a Nottingham Forest defender in Ola Aina. I like Aina, I like Nico Williams. It looks like those will be the two starting fullbacks/wingbacks for Nottingham Forest. If I'm wrong, please let me know down below, Forest fans. But it seems to be that Williams and Aina are likely to be the two starting. I don't think it looks like at the moment one is significantly more likely to start than the other. I think they're just both first choice. And I think they will get some attacking opportunities in that defence. And also, we spoke about that last season, despite conceding lots of goals, Forest were actually 4th for expected goals conceded. So underlying data-wise, they're a very strong defence. So there we go. Those are the defenders that I would personally be considering. Like I said, the ones with stars next to their name, those are the ones that I'd be most interested in. So for me, Robinson, Munoz, Davis, Hall, Aina, they would be my top 5 differential defenders. Let's move on to a very long list of midfielders. So guys, there were so many midfielders that I wanted to talk about. I mean, the list was absolutely ridiculous. And obviously I can only get so many on the screen before the graphic starts becoming way too small. So there are players that are just omitted entirely. But I've also got a list of players above me that I've spoken about more so during preseason already. And the idea here is to talk about players that we're not really mentioning enough. So in terms of players that I love that aren't on the list here to discuss kind of their data and in more detail, Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi at Nottingham Forest, I still really like the pair of them. We know that the data isn't particularly good for either, but the minutes should be fairly decent. Elanga isn't here either. Elanga's got much better data than Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi. So if Elanga gets the minutes, even close to Hudson-Odoi and Gibbs White, you'd argue that Elanga may be even a better option than the two of them because his data is crazy good. But from speaking to Forest fans again, I think that Gibbs White and Hudson-Odoi are slightly more nailed on, and Elanga might not start every game. I suppose Hudson-Odoi might not either. If you want security of minutes, it's Gibbs White. Then also Rodgers. I'm not going to discuss Rodgers here. We've spoken about it to death. He's 5 million. He should start the season for Villa. It's just about if he gets enough starts and enough minutes. But I really like him as an option. Bailey, I would argue, I would say maybe Bailey and Andreas. Let's do them good. Bailey and Andreas, I would argue, are the two best differentials on this list potentially for me. They're not going to be discussed here because I've spoken about them all already. I think Andreas is the best £5.5 million midfielder for me. And Bailey might have snuck into second for me after Nkunku. So if you want a £5.5 million mid up under 5%, Andreas could be the one. I'll discuss him maybe in more detail when we look at Smith Rowe. And Bailey, I would argue, if you already got Nkunku or you don't want him, he might be my favourite 6.5. He might have even snuck ahead of Morgan Gibbs White for me. Matoma's on there as well. I've spoken about the fact that I want to see more of what happens with Brighton. I don't think he's fully nailed like he used to be. And obviously he's come back from quite a long-term injury as well. So let's see what happens with Matoma. I just think they're a slightly better 6.5s. So with those out the way, let's now take a look at this list of players that just aren't really being spoken about much and aren't in many teams. And the first is Jared Bowen, who just gets so many goals and assists every season. He starts every game. He's going to be playing under new management now, and you'd expect that to give them a little bit of a boost because they started to tail off under David Moyes a little bit. And his data's sat there at 0.51 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. I mean, other than the fixtures, I can't see a very good reason to not consider Bowen, but the fixtures really aren't particularly good for West Ham. So that's, for me, the reason he's not in there. I'd rather wait for the fixtures to improve. Rashford has been actually pretty good during pre-season. He's getting a lot of minutes under his belt. He did struggle with a niggle during a couple of the pre-season games, and he's not been fully fit, but he's getting minutes under his belt. Højlund is out for around 6 weeks. So one of Xerxes or Rashford starts as the number 9 for Manchester United. I think there's a chance it is Marcus Rashford. And if it's not as the 9, I'd be extremely surprised if he doesn't start game week 1 on the left. So at least game week 1, I think you're fine. It's just about longer term. We've got Sancho, Anthony, Ahmad, Garnacho, Rashford. I think I've repeated some there. If Højlund's back, Xerxes can play on the left as well. We've seen that in his previous career. So he's in his career for previous teams. So I think Rashford longer term is an issue, and that would probably put me off a little bit because you don't want to book in transfers. But he's a very explosive player that can get goals and can get assists. And when he's on form, he's absolutely worth the 7 million. Just maybe a bigger risk than I would want to take. And the man on the thumbnail, the man here, is Kevin De Bruyne. I feel like he's getting massively disrespected, even by me. De Bruyne looks very likely to start in game week 1, I would say. Let's see what happens in the Community Shield against Manchester United, of which I'm going to that game, by the way, which should be very good. So let's see what happens in that game. If he starts and gets good minutes and Foden isn't involved at all, or he's just sat on the bench, gets a few minutes, I think De Bruyne should start game week 1. And there are suggestions going around that Foden might not even be ready for the Ipswich game. They've just sold Julian Alvarez as well to Atletico Madrid. I think there's a very good chance De Bruyne starts the opening 2 or 3 fixtures. And beyond that, I don't expect him to just be sat on the bench every week. I think his minutes will be okay. And you can see he's got some of the best data on the list here. His creativity is ridiculous. He's got the highest projected points. I think starting with De Bruyne, especially if you're going without Haaland, could be a really nice tactic. And I need to stop disrespecting the man because I think he's going to start the season. And if he does, having De Bruyne against the Chelsea defence that are leaking goals during pre-season and Ipswich, I'm seriously considering trying to squeeze De Bruyne into my team. We've then got Mbeumo. I think for me, if Tony had left, Mbeumo would be an even better option because he's almost confirmed to be on pens there. But we just don't know what's happening with Tony. And also, Brentford's opening fixtures really aren't particularly good. The data's always good for him. The minutes are good for him. I would just rather have someone with better fixtures and or on penalties. Smith Rowe. I've got a feeling Smith Rowe could start the season on fire. I was a little bit worried that his lack of match fitness. I mean, you can see he got 3 starts last season. I think it was 3 starts the season before. He's played like a combined 400 or 500 minutes in the Premier League in 2 seasons now, so his match fitness is in the bin. But he came off the bench for Fulham and scored a goal immediately, and he looked pretty good. I don't necessarily think that he gets close to the amount of minutes Andreas would play, and there's a chance that Andreas is on penalties, and Andreas himself has pretty good data. So I do still wonder if Andreas is the correct one to start the season with. But unless Smith Rowe is favoured on the left, some people are saying that Smith Rowe has been brought in to play the 10 role. Unless Fulham are going to adapt their formation and play with 2 10s, Andreas could be playing a little bit deeper. So let's see what happens. I think they've got at least 1 more pre-season game, Fulham, maybe 2. If Smith Rowe can get a start, and it looks like he's playing a more advanced role than Andreas, or he's getting more chances to score, Smith Rowe could be really nice. But I do want to assess if Andreas is on pens. What I would love for the next pre-season game for Fulham is Smith Rowe to start and Fulham to get a penalty with everyone on the pitch. Because then we get a bit of an idea about all of the unknowns around the 2 of them. But I think it could be a really nice tactic to start with one of them because they've got Leicester and Ipswich in game week 2 and 3. Maybe I'm a little bit too hot on Fulham. I just think they've got some really nice priced assets. Diogo Jota has to be mentioned, obviously, at 7.5 million. More and more people seem to think that Jota will be getting the starting role, potentially as the number 9, could play off the left as well. If Jota starts, I mean, I say this every season, every game week. If Jota starts, he is one of the best options in FPL. So I have to put him on this list, and I have to put a star next to him because we're going off the basis that he may get a starting role. But with Gakpo, with Darwin, with Diaz, with Elliott and Soboslai who can play the number 10, are we going to get enough minutes for Jota? And if we're not, well, then it's not worth the risk for me, especially at 7.5. When you can get someone like Anthony Gordon or even Bowen, the safety of minutes and the attacking returns are there. So it's a high-risk play. Let's see what happens in the remaining preseason games. But I like Jota a lot. Ahmad, I think, will start game week 1. In fact, I'm very sure at the moment, based on everything we know, because Anthony's clearly out of favour. He's not been performing. Sancho coming back into the team. He's looked okay during pre-season, but he's still lacking that end product for Manchester United. And also, he did have a massive falling out with Ten Hag. Rashford, I think, could be favoured as the number 9, but if not, he plays on the left anyway. And Garnacho is coming back very, very late from the Copa America and will need to build his fitness back up after his break. So I actually think Ahmad will start on the right wing in game week 1, and it's a game against Fulham at home. Beyond that, if he continues to impress, which he has been, I would expect him to continue to get good minutes. And also, he has been taking some set pieces for Man United as well. My only concern would be that last season, Garnacho was towards the back end favoured on the right wing. And so I just have concerns if Garnacho's playing on the right, well, then Ahmad doesn't play on the left, so he will be on the bench. So let's see what happens there. But at 5 million, he feels like a good option. I just spoke about Harvey Elliott. My understanding was that Soboslai would be first choice number 10 for Liverpool. And I spoke about that Gakpo could even play that role. If they play with like 2 9s, like Jota and Gakpo just drops in behind Jota. But more and more Liverpool fans are telling me, stop ignoring Harvey Elliott. Harvey Elliott is likely to start as the 10. He was brilliant last season for them. And also during pre-season, he's looked exceptionally strong. So maybe he does. And at 5.5 million, if you can get Harvey Elliott starting as the number 10 for Liverpool, great. But you'd imagine even if he starts, he's coming off around 60 minutes. And I think if that's the case, I don't know that he carries enough attacking threat. The data was okay, by the way, but a lot of that was expected assist. Does he carry the attacking threat if he's only getting 60 minutes on average per game? Let's see what happens again in the remaining games of pre-season. Let's see if Arnie's slot suggests that one of them is first choice. One of my favourite 6.5s and a player that I am increasingly trying more and more to get into the starting 11 is actually Brennan Johnson, because I am increasingly confident that he starts the season on the right wing for Spurs. And when he does, his data is one of the best on this list. I love that opening game against Leicester. I think that Everton could be slightly weaker defensively this season, ever so slightly. and as a result, I don't hate the fixture in game week 2. He just feels like a player that has the ability to go out and get multiple attacking returns. So I really like Brennan Johnson at 6.5. It's just about, again, is it worth starting the season with a minutes risk Brennan Johnson when you could start with someone slightly safer like Gibbs White or Nkunku, or even a little bit more money, you could go to the likes of Mbeumo. Do I want to start with a minutes risk? I think that's the thing you need to weigh up. Semenyo at 5.5, rubbish data last season, which I was a little bit surprised at, and it's the reason that he's not been in many of my drafts. And I suppose the fixtures really aren't ideal for Bournemouth. As you can see here, one of the worst in the league according to Fantasy Football Hub. But they're not, I don't think they're awful fixtures. Also, data doesn't tell you everything. And I think he was getting some really nice positions last season for Bournemouth. And I think he will improve again this season as well, as long as he gets the starts. So I certainly think you could do worse than Semenyo at 5.5. Mavididi, I think that's perhaps pronounced. I don't watch any Championship football. I hold my hands up. I don't pretend to watch it. Leicester fans are very excited by Mavididi, and he should be very, very nailed. 42 starts last season. Plays a very attacking role for them, can play on the left, I believe on the right or through the centre. And I've been told, hopefully correctly, that if Vardy's not on the pitch, Mavididi has a very good chance of being on penalties as well. So I think he could be really nice at 1.2% owned. I just don't love the opening fixtures, and I just think why not start with someone like Smith Rowe or Andreas and just assess how are Leicester going to look in the Premier League. But he could be an absolute steal at 5.5. You've then got Oscar Bob, who looks set, like Ahmad, to be starting in game week 1. But again, let's see what happens in the Community Shield. Let's see how quickly the players come back. And I think Bob will very quickly see the bench. As soon as the key players are back, I don't expect to continue to see him starting. And he only got 2 starts last season, but when he did, tons of chances for attacking return. So I really like Oscar Bob, and he's a very high-risk player to start with in game week 1. But if you get Chelsea and Ipswich for a City attacker for 5 million, Oscar Bob could be arguably better than Rodgers and Ahmad at that 5 million price. I'd love to know down below, if you had to start with one of Ahmad, Rodgers, or Bob, who are you most likely to start with? Then we've got Minte. I thought it was Minter, a bit like Mini Minter, but apparently it's Minte. Let me know down below which of the two is correct. But anyway, again, as you can see, didn't watch much Eredivisie last season. He has the best data on this list, but playing in a much weaker league. The reason that I love him as an option, and again, I won't ruin my team tomorrow, but I am really trying to squeeze him into my team, is I don't think Brighton have an out-and-out right winger other than him. Who, I mean, he can play off the left through the centre as well, but he's played the majority of his career, which is quite short, by the way, on the right wing. And so I think he's kind of got to start the season on the right, and I think his minutes will arguably even be better than someone like a Matoma. He's obviously $1 million cheaper as well, and in pre-season, he's looked exceptionally strong. So I am starting to wonder, could he be up there, maybe alongside Andreas, Hudson-Odoi, and maybe Smith Rowe as one of the best 5.5s? Again, let's have a look at my draft more on the players that I'm trying to squeeze in, but I like the look of him a lot, and I think he could be a cheeky differential. We just want to assess his minutes, I suppose. Is he definitely going to be starting on that right wing for Brighton? You've then got Kamada at 5.5. Lots of people excited by him. From my understanding, and again, I've not watched enough of him, exceptionally gifted footballer. I just look at his data from the past, and I don't know that he stands out to me as a really good FPL option. He looks like he's very gifted, will create chances, but is he going to get enough chances himself? Is he going to score enough goals and get enough assists? We'll see, because, I mean, Palace under Glasner have been excellent, but I would just say I'd rather a 5.5 with better underlying data and more goal threat, probably. But he could be a really nice option. So there we go. How long is that? Almost 13 minutes on the midfielders. But I think these are the positions where you could fly up the ranks if you get this right. Let me know if I've missed anyone. I'm sure I have, and apologies if I have. But these are the players that I would be looking at. You can see the stars next to Bowen, De Bruyne, Smith Rowe, Jota, Ahmad, Johnson, and then Minte. Those, for me, are probably the best options. So, guys, moving on to the best forward differentials. The list is actually much shorter, but I think 4 of these options are actually incredibly good value and could offer you a nice, again, differential into the attack. And then 3 of them I've just added on here to have a little bit of a chat about them because they could offer some decent value. But we'll start with Mateta. So Mateta is at the Olympics at the moment with France. I believe he's on 4 goals during the Olympics. He's been performing incredibly well. The final is on Friday, right? I'm recording this on Wednesday. So Friday the 9th, they're playing against Spain at 5 p.m. So he's got a full week, or just over a full week, until Palace's first game of the season. And I know players for the Euros and Copa America have been given like 2 or 3 week breaks. We've heard from Pep that he wants to give them at least 4 weeks potentially. But do remember that those players went from Premier League straight off with their national teams. Mateta's had a break. He just had a break between the Premier League and the start of the Olympics. So you could argue, and I'm not saying this is necessarily, you could argue that he's actually more match fit than a lot of the players that have been to tournaments or have just had a bit of a break and are now in pre-season, because he's had his break and then he's using the Olympics to get back up to match fitness. So I think if I had to bet now, I would say I'm 80% sure that Mateta starts in game week 1 based on the information that I currently have. And so he's got to be in our consideration, because if Mateta didn't go to the Olympics, there is no way he's at 8.2% because he was so good last season. And I know Elise's left, and that is the big question mark around them. But they've brought in Kamada. They've still got Eze, at least at the time we're recording. Doesn't look likely now that he's going to leave, at least for the first few game weeks. Mateta's got to be in our consideration. His data wasn't that strong last season, but I think he's a very, very good finisher. He's a poacher. He'll get chances. And I think that Palace will continue to look good once again this season. So Mateta's got to be in there. I suppose it's just a shame that he's at 7.5. If he was at 6.5 or 7, you'd maybe feel a little bit happier taking the risk. But I suppose at 7.5, he's not far off Havertz or Isak. So he is quite expensive. And if you went for a 3.52 instead, you could get Anthony Gordon, Bowen, Eze for 0.5 less. So I understand why people might not go there, but I think he deserves consideration. And let's maybe see if Glasner comes out with any quotes in press conferences around whether Mateta might be in line to start in game week 1. At 6 million, I think you have two exceptionally good options, and I'm really struggling as to who I prefer. I'd love to know down below, is it Moniz or is it Wood? Who do you prefer out of the two of them? Very similar ownership. Data-wise, both extremely impressive. So Moniz actually put up 0.54 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 last season. I didn't realise his data was that good. I knew how good Chris Woods was at 0.63. So these are two players that I think will get you at least 12 to 15 goals if they start the majority of games for their teams this season. I would argue that Moniz is slightly more nailed longer term, but at the start of the season, I would be shocked if they both don't start the opening 2 or 3 games. Awoniyi is obviously a risk to Chris Wood, but I think he really needs to build up his match fitness after a very lengthy injury last season. And I think as a result, Wood's been starting in pre-season. He's been looking good, scoring goals. I think Wood is safe until at least game week 3 or 4, would be my opinion. Maybe game week 4 post-international break is when we might start to see Wood rotated a little bit more. As to who I prefer at the moment, I might be slightly leaning Moniz, simply because I think if there's a chance I want to keep them longer term, I don't want to transfer them out. I think his minutes are slightly more secure longer term. I know Raul Jimenez could even take minutes off him, or they could have a change of formation and play 2 of them, but I do think that Moniz is probably going to remain first choice. So for me, I think they're both very good, but at the moment, I'm actually slightly leaning towards Moniz. Then at 5.5, Adam Armstrong, I would argue maybe at the moment, is the best £5.5 million forward if you're looking at that price. I know we've got João Pedro, but we just don't know he's going to be fit enough to start the season. There is also going to be a lot of rotation in that Brighton attack. They've got plenty of options, especially in sort of the number 9 and the number 10 role. As I said with Minte, less so on the right wing and potentially even less so on the left. Although João Pedro and Matoma could even be rotated on the left if they'd prefer to play someone else as the 10. So I do just worry a little bit with João Pedro. So arguably Armstrong is the best £5.5 million forward if you want to go at that price point. His data was the best on the list last season, but this was, of course, in the Championship. He managed to get, I think it was over 40 attacking returns last season in the Championship. So the man was ridiculous. He's nailed on. He's on penalties. And actually, I don't mind Southampton's opening fixtures. So I think probably a player that is going under the radar more than he should definitely deserves to be over 3% owned. It's just about if you want to start the season with a £5.5 million forward. And if I could stretch the extra 0.5 for Moniz and Wood, no, they're not on penalties, and no, they're not as nailed, but they are playing in 2 attacks that I expect to do slightly better, and I just think that the 2 of them will probably get more attacking returns in the Prem. I could be massively off with that, though, and honestly, I think all of Mateta, Moniz, Wood, and Armstrong, and especially the latter 3, at their prices, could be excellent value. If you're not going for them and you still are looking for differentials, there is a chance that Xerxes starts the season as the number 9 in Game Week 1. And I think we might get a good indication of that in the Community Shield. But more and more people, myself included, think that Rashford could get the nod as the number 9. And we could see something like Sancho on the left and Ahmad on the right in Game Week 1. But if Xerxes is going to start, 7 million's a lot. And he's not shown the ability in his career thus far to score lots and lots of goals. But I still feel like he could be a good option to start the season if it looks very likely that it will start in Game Week 1. And we'll assess that the closer we get to the deadline. And then just a little bit of a shout out to the Everton attackers. I don't necessarily want to invest in the Everton attack, but Calvert-Lewin, if he's going to start and be on penalties, it's always worth considering, especially at 6. I think he's the only £6 million forward that will be on pens in FPL. Like Meniz and Wood, like I said, they probably won't be. So I really, really like DCL as an option. His data's always strong. It's always with DCL, just can he stay fit? Because if he can stay fit, I think he's great. And in Dai, I think that's how it's pronounced. Apologies if it's not. He's obviously been signed and brought in. We've seen a little bit from him in the past. I don't think he's a natural goal scorer like Calvert-Lewin. His data wasn't as strong last season. However, if they both start, there could be more goals for Everton. I think what sounds more likely is that one of them starts. So I put them both on here. But if they're both getting minutes and they're scoring a lot more goals, Everton attackers might be worth considering. Then we might even start looking at someone like Dwight McNeil. But for now, I'd probably have to say avoid the 2 Everton players, but definitely have them in your consideration. And let's assess what their minutes look like earlier on. So I think for me, if we're looking like ranking the best forward differentials, maybe like Meniz, Wood, Armstrong, Mateta, just based on like value, I really like the idea of trying to squeeze one of those 2 6 million forwards into my team. So guys, there we have it. Those are the players that are lower than 10% ownership that I think you should stop ignoring and consider putting into your team. And let me know down below any players that you have that are lower than 10%. Make sure to smash the like button on this video. I really do appreciate it. And hit that subscribe button if you have not yet done so. And as I said at the start of the video, please do check out FPL Therapy. All of the links will be down below. I'd love your support on the podcast and I'd love for you to become a regular listener as well. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.